Have you ever wondered how a single act of kindness, just one, could change the course of someone's entire life? How a decision made by a child, with nothing in her pockets but courage, could transform not only her own future, but awaken something lost in another soul? This is the story of a 12-year-old black girl named Lyanna Brooks, who carried more weight on her thin shoulders than most adults do in a lifetime, and the day fate decided to test her. The morning began like any other in that poor, forgotten town. The sky was pale gray, the air damp with the smell of soil and rust. Chickens clucked in the distance, and the occasional cough of an old truck echoed across the fields. Markets were opening, the kind where vendors proudly displayed their baskets of fruit, their bright umbrellas shielding them from the soon-to-rise sun. But Lyanna had no umbrella, no stall, just a cart, rickety, wooden, and barely holding together. She was small, barefoot, her brown skin dusted with dry earth from the fields she had trudged through before dawn. Her braids hung loose and uneven, tied hastily in the half-dark before she left. On her cart were collard greens, onions, and a few soft tomatoes she had picked by flashlight the night before. Her stepfather, Rick, hadn't helped. He never did. He was drunk again, muttering curses on the porch until he passed out in his chair. Lyanna's mother was long gone, and with her went the warmth of childhood. What was left was a necklace, a small silver pendant engraved faintly, the only reminder of a woman who had once kissed her forehead goodnight and told her she was loved. At 12, Lyanna should have been in school, reading books, solving problems, making friends. Instead, she was the problem solver, the provider. If she didn't earn at least $10 by the end of the day, Rick would unleash his rage. She had bruises from last week still fading on her arms, cruel reminders of what happened when she failed. So with a voice hoarse from exhaustion, she cried out in the market, "Fresh greens, $1! Fresh onions!" But no one came. Shoppers passed her cart without a glance, heading toward the stalls with neat displays and umbrellas. One woman, elegant in a leather purse and clean shoes, glanced at Lyanna and muttered, "Poor child, ought to be in school." Lyanna heard. She always did. But she said nothing. By mid-morning, the sun pressed down hot and heavy. Sweat stuck her oversized shirt to her skin. Her bare feet burned on the dusted road. A man in dirty overalls stopped, picked up a bunch of her greens, inspected them with disdain, then sneered. "I'll give you 50 cents for the lot." Lyanna hesitated. Her greens were worth more. But before she could answer, he shoved them back into the cart and muttered, "Girl like you should know better than to argue." He walked away. She clenched her fists. She didn't cry. Not anymore. By noon, most vendors were packing up, counting their cash. Lyanna had sold only 3 bundles. 3. Her cart was still half full. She whispered to herself, "It's okay. I can make it up on the way home." But her voice betrayed the truth. She didn't believe it. The road home stretched long and empty, lined with dry ditches and patches of stubborn weeds. It was the kind of road that seemed to swallow sound, leaving only the crunch of bare feet and the squeak of her cart. Each step felt heavier, her mind replaying the storm that awaited at home. Rick's anger, his hands, the dread that clung to her like smoke. And then, fate shifted. A screech split the air, followed by the sickening thud of metal on flesh. Then silence, broken only by the faint roll of a wheel. Lyanna froze. Her heart pounded. Slowly, she pushed her cart forward until she reached the bend in the road. There he was, an old man sprawled at the edge of the gravel, his leg twisted unnaturally, a pool of blood seeping beneath his head. His hat lay in the grass. His clothes were wrinkled but not poor, his shoes clean, his skin pale against the dirt. He looked like someone's grandfather, someone who should have been sitting by a fire, not bleeding alone on the side of the road. "Sir?" Lyanna whispered, kneeling beside him. His eyes fluttered, then shut again. He was breathing. Barely. She looked around. The car that hit him was long gone. There were no houses nearby, no phones. She had never owned one, just silence. And then her eyes fell on her cart. It was flimsy, meant for vegetables, not bodies. But it had wheels. It could move. "Please don't die," she begged as she tried to lift him. He was heavy, his limbs awkward, her arms trembling with the effort. Twice she failed. The third time, with every ounce of strength, she rolled him onto the cart. His legs dangled off the back. Her chest burned, but she didn't stop. She grabbed the handles and pushed. The road to the hospital was uphill at first. The cart squeaked, nearly tipping over a pothole. Her legs shook. Sweat ran down her back. At one point, a pickup truck slowed near her. She waved desperately, screaming for help. The driver glanced, then sped off, leaving her in the dust. "Please," she whispered, tears streaming. "Just let me get there." Minutes bled into what felt like hours. When the hospital came into view, Lyanna nearly collapsed. She pushed through the doors, her voice cracking. "Help! He's hurt!" Nurses rushed forward, startled by the sight of a frail girl pushing an old man in a vegetable cart. One asked, "Where's his ID?" "Insurance?" Lyanna shook her head. "I don't know him. He was on the road. Please." "We can't admit without payment," the nurse said flatly. Lyanna fumbled in her pocket, pulling out crumpled bills, her day's earnings. "It's all I have." The nurse looked unimpressed. Then Lyanna did something that broke me the first time I imagined it. She reached to her collar, untied the chain, and held out her mother's necklace. Silver, worn but real, her last memory of her mother. "Take this, please, just save him." The nurse hesitated, then nodded. The man was rushed away. Lyanna stood frozen, her chest hollow. Her cart, her vegetables, her money, and now her mother's necklace, all gone. But someone might live, and somehow, that was enough. When she left the hospital, the sky had darkened. Rain threatened. Her shoulders ached, her hands raw. She returned home with nothing. Rick was waiting. The moment she stepped inside, the air turned to fire. He saw the pitiful bills on the counter, heard her story, and his rage exploded. His slap sent her sprawling. His fists followed. When he learned about the necklace, he grew darker. "That was silver," he spat. "Worth something. You gave it away to some stranger?" "It was mine," she whispered. Wrong answer. He shoved her into the wall. Then he screamed the words that changed her fate. "Get out. Get your sorry self out of my house." Rain poured as Lyanna stumbled into the night, barefoot and bruised, her hair plastered to her face. She didn't look back. She didn't beg. She just walked. And somewhere in that same night, in the quiet of a hospital bed, the man she saved began to stir. His name was Donovan Hale, and Lyanna had no idea he was one of the richest men in the state. There is a moment that arrives after a near death when the world feels too bright, too loud, as if the air itself is new, and you do not deserve it. Donovan Hale woke to that kind of air. The ceiling was a clean, institutional white, and the heart monitor counted time in soft electronic taps. Pain folded around his ribs, dull and steady, like a drum played far away. For a few disoriented seconds, he thought he was still walking, coat collar up, hands in pockets, letting the quiet swallow him because quiet was easier than memory. Then a nurse leaned into his line of sight, and he remembered the impact he had not seen coming. The cold gravel, a girl's whisper of a voice saying, "Please." "You were hit on the edge of town," the nurse said gently as she checked the drip. "No ID, no phone. We pieced it together from your jacket tag and your face on the evening news. It is always disorienting when someone who has been deliberately avoiding attention learns. Attention has found him anyway." He swallowed carefully, breath catching against bandaged ribs, and asked the only question that mattered. "Who brought me here?" "A girl," the nurse answered, and something about the way she said it made the air sharper still. "She was maybe 12, small, thin, wore her hair in braids. She pushed you in on a vegetable cart. She kept her hands on you the whole time, like she was afraid you would slip away if she let go. She gave us everything she had to admit you." He turned his head, eyes fixed on the window, because sometimes the only way to hold composure is to look at a line of light you cannot touch. "Everything she had," he repeated, voice unsteady. The nurse nodded. "Cash, a few crumpled bills, then a necklace. Silver, old. She asked us to take it so we would not turn you away." I am going to level with you for a second. This is where I always pause when I tell this story, because there are words that cut deeper than knives when you are grieving, and one of them is necklace. Donovan's wife had worn a thin chain with a small pendant, not unlike the one the nurse described. He had given it to her when things were still new and full of promise. After the accident, the jewelry box had become a museum he could not visit. He had been grappling with the kind of silence that sinks into bone. To hear that a child had removed a necklace from her own neck and traded it for his pulse left him blinking back a storm. "What is her name?" he asked. "We do not know," came the answer he feared. "She left as soon as we moved you. Would not sit down. Would not wait for a thank you." The nurse hesitated, then added in a lower voice, "She looked like someone who has learned that waiting makes things worse." His assistant, Marcus Bell, arrived with a tablet and a face full of relief and reprimand. "Sir, you disappeared. The estate staff thought you were at the lake. Then the police called, then the hospital. We have reporters holding on line 3. Donovan lifted one hand and the old habit of command slid into place without effort. "Not the press, not yet." "Find the girl." Marcus blinked. "We do not have a name. Start without one. Camera footage, market stalls, anyone who would notice a child pushing an old man on a cart. The necklace is silver oval pendant with faded engravings. It matters." Marcus glanced at the monitors, the IV line, the sling. "You need rest." Donovan's look held. "I need to keep a promise I have not even spoken yet. What do you owe someone who gives you back a life you were not sure you wanted? I do not think there is a calculus for that. There is only motion." By early afternoon, while the physician shook his head at the discharge request and compromised with a wheelchair and a sling, Marcus had already pulled the hospital's exterior footage and a couple of grainy frames from a bodega camera near the market's edge. The images were low resolution, but unmistakable. A slight black girl, 2 loose braids, a too large shirt, bare feet dusted with road. The cart was a box nailed to a pair of wheels that had no business carrying a person, but it had. A vendor recognized her. "Lyanna," he said. "Comes every week. Sells greens and onions. Never haggles. Works quiet. Some days she limps. Quiet does not mean invisible. Not if you know where to look." Another vendor remembered the sound of a slap you did not see but felt across the market a week earlier, and how the girl had kept working afterward with a stunned patience that only comes from practice. Someone else muttered a name that was not a father, but a shadow. Rick. Drunk. Trailer by the cotton fields. You learn a town quickly when you start with the pain it hides. Lyanna had already left the hospital when they were looking at her image. She had sat through the late afternoon rain under the metal eave of a bus shelter and tried to stay small. This is the part people who have always had a bed sometimes do not understand. The first hours after you are pushed out are an argument between relief and terror. Relief that the threshold that hurt you is behind you. Terror because there is no other threshold with your name on it. She watched the streetlights flicker on. She counted cars until she lost count. She cupped her hands to warm them with breath. When exhaustion finally took her, she let her head tip against the cold plexiglass and dreamed of her mother's voice reading a sentence that would not finish. Donovan asked to be driven with the window cracked, city air mixing with the antiseptic smell that had followed him out of the ward. He told Marcus to take Willow Street and then to slow near the auto garage where the bus stop sat crooked against a chain-link fence. Sometimes grief gives you a strange sixth sense for where the lost go to ground. The SUV rolled to a stop. He saw her before the tires stilled, knees to chest, arms wrapped around herself the way a child learns to do when no one else will. He stood carefully, ribs reminding him that arrogance has limits, and crossed the wet pavement. "I believe you have something of mine," he said softly. Her eyes opened, and for a heartbeat she looked like she might bolt. Recognition tugged against fear. He was cleaner now, shaved, bandaged but upright. The pallor had lifted from his face, but his eyes carried the same dazed tenderness she had seen in that split second on the road. He reached into his coat and drew out a small cloth bundle the nurse had brought to his room with a cautionary lecture about donations and receipts. He had not listened to the lecture. He had cupped the pendant in his palm and followed its quiet gravity here. She stared at the necklace as if it were a mirror she had avoided. He held it between them, not pushing it toward her, simply letting it exist like a bridge you may cross when you are ready. "I am not here to give charity," he said, because he could see the rigid pride in her shoulders. that protective shell some children develop to keep their last shreds of dignity intact. I am here because you did something when everyone else did nothing. You gave the last thing you had. I do not want to pay you for that and ruin it. I want to honor it and make sure it was not the last good thing you get to choose." She hesitated a long time. If you have ever watched a child reach for the only relic of their mother after believing it was gone, you know why the seconds stretch. Finally, she lifted her hand. Their fingers brushed. The pendant trembled in her palm. She closed her fist around it and pressed it to the hollow at her throat. It belonged there so perfectly that for a moment something like relief ran through the morning like a current. "I do not got nowhere to go," she said, barely above a whisper. He nodded. "Then come eat, and we will decide what to do about the second part with a full stomach." He did not say, "Come home with me," because he knew that words like home are dangerous if you do not plan to keep them every day you breathe afterward. He said something he could keep today. A booth at a diner 2 blocks away became a border between past and what might be next. He ordered soup and bread and something sweet because salt mends bodies, and sugar tells your brain that danger has receded a little. She did not look at the price. She did not look around to see who was watching. She ate like someone who had learned to ration and forgot for a minute. He asked her name and let the silence be long while she decided whether to share it. "Lyanna," she said eventually. "Brooks." He told her his first name and left the last where it was. He asked simple things that do not feel like interrogation if you ask them gently. "Who do you live with? Are you safe there? Do you have anyone else?" She answered selectively at first. Then the story found its own momentum and moved through her in halting waves. Markets at dawn, Rick on the porch. The line she crossed when she decided to trade silver for a stranger's chance. The door that slammed, the rain, the bench. "I did not want nothing from you," she said, and there was no complaint in it, just a statement of fact. He shook his head. "You did not want. You deserve. Not because of what you did for me, but because of who you already are. If you are wondering where the law is in all this, the answer is that it arrives when called by people who know which number to dial and how to make a situation sound urgent in the right tone." Donovan stepped outside to call someone who could move the gears without grinding Lyanna into them. He had a list of names you build over decades when you donate wings to hospitals and scholarships to colleges and mobile clinics, to counties that forget their own. He called Elaine Park, who ran a community outreach program with a small shelter that specialized in what Elaine called first nights. Not a permanent solution, not a custody battle resolved, just a clean bed, new clothes, a hot shower, a social worker who can ask harder questions than a kind man in a sling. "Bring her," Elaine said. "We will do intake without paperwork. We will mark the necklace on the property list so it stays on her neck and not in a locker. If it needs to be evidence later, we will cross that bridge with the right people." He went back inside and paid the bill with cash because there are moments you do not want to print out to become a breadcrumb for gossip. He asked if she was ready. She nodded. The spoon shook slightly when she put it down, and he pretended not to notice because sometimes dignity is letting someone stand up before they have all their balance back. The shelter was nothing like the cold dormitories people imagine when they hear the word. Elaine believed in warm light, soft towels, and shelves of books that younger kids could reach without standing on chairs. She met them at the door, read the room in a heartbeat, and switched to the tone teachers use when they know a child is smart and wary. "We are going to do 3 things," she said to Lyanna. "Shower, fresh clothes, sandwich number 2 because you do not fool me, and then we will sit together and you can tell me what you want, not just what you survived." Lyanna's shoulders loosened by a fraction. It is remarkable how quickly the body responds to being seen properly. While Lyanna disappeared down the hall with a staffer and a bundle of cotton clothes, Donovan sat with Elaine at a small office desk and explained what he knew and what he refused to accept. Elaine listened, arms crossed, eyes kind and practical. She had a gift for forgiving the world for being cruel while also refusing to let it stay that way on her watch. "We will file a report because we have to," she said. "We will not send her back tonight. If a deputy goes to Rick's trailer, they will find the floor sticky and the man angry, and they will write a note that says, 'Check again in the morning.' Sometimes that is enough to start a case. Sometimes it is not. If you want to move this faster, You will need a judge's ear or a guardian ad litem who owes you a favor. Do you have either? Donovan exhaled. Yes. I want to be clear about something here, because this is where people project their fantasies onto stories like this. Donovan did not sweep in with a cape. He did not adopt a child over dinner. He did not solve poverty with a check. He did what an adult with resources and humility should do. He put a barrier between a kid and a bad night. He promised to come back the next day with a plan he could legally keep. He let professionals do what they knew how to do better than he did, and he did not ask to be thanked. On their way out, Elaine paused and looked through a thin window into the laundry room. Lyanna stood there alone for a moment, her hair damp from the shower, new t-shirt hanging loose, the pendant bright against her skin now that the silver had been cleaned. She lifted the chain, kissed the metal like a prayer, and tucked it back beneath the collar. The gesture was so quick you could miss it. Elaine did not miss such things. She smiled at Donovan with that small, knowing smile women carry when they have been doing quiet rescue missions for years with no spotlight. You did right to bring her, she said. He nodded and did not trust his voice. He did not drive home. He asked Marcus to take him to the courthouse annex, where a family judge he had once funded a literacy initiative, with agreed to meet on a back hallway bench in shirt sleeves. No robe, no pretense, because emergencies do not always fit the calendar. Donovan outlined the facts without embellishment. The judge called Elaine, then the hospital, then the county social worker on duty. Paperwork began to exist where before there had been only suffering. The judge could not do everything that night. He could do enough. Temporary protective custody for 72 hours, an order for a welfare check at the trailer, a hearing scheduled after the weekend with a note in the margin that said expedite. Marcus drove them to the edge of the cotton fields where the trailer tilted on cinder blocks like a bad idea about to collapse. A deputy's car already sat in the dirt, lights off, engine idling. The deputy spoke with Donovan briefly and then rapped on the door. Rick opened it with a beer in hand and that terrible combination of swagger and panic that comes when a man realizes his control has been noticed by people who can take it away. The deputy kept his tone neutral and formal. Welfare check. Report of a minor in danger. Where is she? Not here, Rick snarled. She ran off. Good riddance. The deputy asked 2 more questions and wrote 3 notes. He went inside and came back out with a backpack that had one strap broken and a small paperback shoved into the front pocket like a lifeline. He handed the bag to Donovan without comment. The law moves slow, but it does move when enough eyes are on it. Back at the shelter, the lights were lower. Children's voices had softened into the hush that precedes sleep when a place feels safe enough to close your eyes. Lyanna lay in a narrow bed by a window with a curtain that did not smell of mildew. She kept her hand around the pendant as if the silver itself were warm. When Donovan stepped into the doorway, she opened her eyes in that instantaneous way children in survival mode do. He lifted the backpack. Thought you might want this, he said. She took it, unzipped it, and touched the paperback without pulling it out. Thank you, she said. He nodded. I will come back in the morning, he said carefully. Not a promise woven with forever, just one that could be kept at sunup. She studied his face, looking for the twitch that betrays a liar. She found none. Okay, she whispered. Good night. He stood in the parking lot and let the night press against him. The monitor's beeps had been replaced by cricket song. His ribs ached. He put a hand on the car roof and lowered his head, because sometimes relief is almost as heavy as grief. And when it arrives, your body trembles under the change. Marcus waited without speaking. After a long minute, Donovan straightened and said a sentence that surprised even him with its clarity. I want to build a place where a kid like that never has to choose between saving a life and losing her own. A real place, not a plaque. Marcus did not ask where or how. He just opened the Notes app and wrote the phrase exactly as it had been spoken, because sometimes a mission statement arrives before the blueprint. Morning would bring paperwork and hearings and interviews with a social worker who knew how to ask about bruises without using the word bruise. Morning would bring a meal schedule and a tour of the small library where the books were sorted by how they made you feel, not by Dewey Decimals. Morning would bring trust that grows 1 square inch at a time. But for now, there was a girl sleeping with a silver circle against her pulse, and a man in a parking lot who had remembered finally what a living life was for. She did not know he was a billionaire. She knew he was the man she had refused to let die, and the man who had come back, not with cameras or speeches, but with soup, a ride, and people who treated her as if she were not invisible. If you ask me, that is the kind of wealth that matters first. And yet, because stories like this have turns that no one can engineer, the next chapter would take both of them further than they expected, into rooms where old grief could be blessed into service, and new beginnings would be given names that lasted. Have you ever seen how a single act of kindness, one moment of courage, can ripple outwards until it changes not just one life, but many? Lyanna Brooks never knew that the choice she made on a lonely dirt road, giving up her last treasure to save a stranger, would become the foundation of something much larger than herself. She had no way of knowing that the old man she dragged in her cart, the man she begged nurses to save, was Donovan Hale, a billionaire whose heart had been locked away in grief. And yet, because of her, the lock had been broken, and from that wound something alive began to grow. The days after the crash were heavy, but also filled with a strange kind of light. Lyanna stayed at the shelter with the silver necklace safely back on her chest. At night she still woke trembling, expecting Rick's rage, but instead of shouting there was silence, and instead of blows there were blankets and warm lamps. Donovan came every day, not as a savior with gifts, but as a man who understood loss. He sat with her, told her stories of his own daughter Zoe, and listened when she finally found the courage to share her own fears. He never once pushed her to call him family, never demanded that she be grateful. He simply showed her, through presence, that she mattered. When the court ruled that Rick had forfeited his right to her care, Lyanna didn't cry. She simply breathed, for what felt like the first time. The judge looked at Donovan with measured eyes, and in that courtroom something shifted. Lyanna was no longer an unwanted burden. She was a child with a future, and Donovan was determined to guard it. Moving into Donovan's estate felt unreal. She had never seen ceilings so high, staircases that curved like ribbons, or windows taller than doors. For a moment she thought it would swallow her whole, but Donovan was careful. He didn't flood her with things. He gave her choices. Her first room wasn't filled with expensive furniture. It was filled with books, blankets, and a small desk where she could draw. He told her gently, "This house has been silent for too long. If you want, we can make it a home again together." At first she was cautious. Old wounds don't vanish with new walls. She still counted coins in her pocket, even though she didn't need to, still ate quickly as if someone would take her plate away, still flinched if a voice rose too sharply. But Donovan noticed and adapted. He made sure mealtimes were calm. He gave her space when she needed silence. And slowly laughter began to return. Sometimes in the kitchen, where she discovered she loved baking. Sometimes in the library, where she read stories aloud as if her mother were listening. For Donovan, hearing that laughter was like sunlight pouring into a house long shuttered. But he knew it wasn't enough to give safety to one child. Lyanna had reminded him of something larger, that countless children carried bruises, burdens, and hunger while the world looked away. And so the idea was born, the Zoe Center for Youth and Courage. It wasn't flashy. No marble floors, no gold-trimmed doors, just red brick, warm lights, and wide hallways filled with life. At its heart was a simple promise. No child would ever have to choose between saving someone else and losing everything they had. Above the entrance were words carved in stone, the Zoe Center for Youth and Courage. To most people, it was just a name. To Donovan, it was his daughter's memory honored. To Lyanna, it was proof that her sacrifice had not been in vain. Inside the center, life thrived. Classrooms buzzed with children learning to read, paint, and dream. The kitchen always smelled of bread and soup. The walls were covered with drawings, little declarations of hope from hands that had once trembled. Some kids had scars you could see, others carried invisible wounds, but all of them found refuge here. And guiding them, not as a guest but as a leader, was Lyanna. She had grown taller, her posture straighter, her braids neat and proud. Around her neck, the silver necklace gleamed softly. She wore it not as a symbol of loss, but as a badge of survival. Younger children followed her, copying the way she spoke kindly, the way she listened fully. She wasn't loud, but her presence commanded trust. She tutored kids who struggled with math, helped in the kitchen, and told bedtime stories to the youngest when nightmares came. She had once been a child begging to be seen, and now she was the one seeing others. One autumn afternoon, Donovan stood at the edge of a classroom, leaning lightly on his cane. He watched Lyanna surrounded by girls sewing fabric pieces into bright quilts. Her laughter filled the room, easy and unguarded. For Donovan, that was enough. It was proof that healing was real. Later that day, they sat beneath a maple tree on the grounds of the center. The air smelled faintly of cinnamon from the kitchen where pies were cooling. Children played nearby, their shouts and laughter mixing with the wind. "Why did you name it after her?" Lyanna asked, eyes on the playground. "Why not me?" Donovan looked at her for a long time. His voice, when it came, was gentle. "Because what you gave me brought my daughter back, not in body, but in spirit. Zoe was brave, kind, and full of light. When you carried me on that cart, when you gave up your mother's necklace, you reminded me of her. You reminded me of the good I thought I had lost. I lost my daughter, but you showed me how to live again." Lyanna lowered her gaze to the necklace in her hands. "I didn't do it to be remembered," she whispered. "I know," Donovan said, his eyes shining. "That's why I'll never forget it." Silence stretched between them, comfortable and warm. Then slowly, Lyanna leaned her head against his shoulder. Not as a child begging for protection, but as a young woman resting at last in a place where she was safe. Years passed and the Zoe Center grew. More children came, each with a story of pain, each finding healing in its walls. Lyanna became its heartbeat. She didn't speak often of that night, the cart, the rain, the necklace. But every time she helped another child, every time she offered a smile or a listening ear, she was carrying forward the lessons she had lived. That kindness without condition is the most powerful force in the world. And Donovan, when people asked why he, a grieving billionaire who had hidden from the world, had suddenly poured himself into helping children, his answer was simple. Because once, when I had nothing left, a girl gave me everything she had, including the one piece of her mother she still carried. She never asked for anything in return, but I owe her the rest of my life. That necklace still hung around Lyanna's neck. Not just silver anymore, but a living symbol of hope, resilience, and the truth that even the smallest act of courage can build a home where none existed before. So if you ever doubt the power of a single decision, remember her story. Remember the girl with bare feet, a squeaky cart, and a silver pendant who changed a billionaire's life and built a future for countless children. Because kindness, when given freely, doesn't just save one life. It creates a world where hope can live again.